Come on, let's get some of the lads together. Let's have a good idea. Okay, yeah, all right. Come on, fellas. Get around the piano. Let's have a good go. Come on, then. You ready? Come on, you lot. Go on, then.
Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Lincoln City are the team, the Reds is their name. Stinsel Bank is their home ground and football is their game. So come and cheer them on, you lads, support them all the way. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight.
Morning all, how we doing? Out on another dog walk this morning. Time is precious, but I thought I would put another video out there just because there's a bit of a debate going on at the moment on social media, and I thought that it was worth kind of picking it up just a little bit. 2 or 3 times now on various kind of platforms, be it Facebook, Twitter, etc. I've seen some criticism of the media output from the club, from Radio Lincolnshire, from the Echo, and I think it's too easy to group all of those kind of areas together and say this isn't good enough, whereas in actual fact, I think that that's probably wrong, and it's really easy to mistake or to take rather what we have for granted. So let's kind of start with the club's media output, because people say that the away kit hasn't been launched yet. No, it hasn't. Shrewsbury have only announced their home kit today, so yeah, we're hungry for news. Nothing's really happening, and so that accentuates the news that we're waiting for and makes it seem more important. So we do need an away kit. By the time we go away, 3 weeks tomorrow, or is it 3 weeks tomorrow? 2 weeks tomorrow, maybe. Wow. By the time we go away 2 weeks tomorrow, the kit will be released. So I don't understand why it's therefore poor that the club haven't released it in some people's eyes, because I don't get what the rush is when Shrewsbury have only done their home kit today. I mean, there could be all sorts of reasons why we haven't announced it. And if the club puts something out there and say, oh, there's a supply issue, then they get ridiculed anyway. So do you know what I mean? It's hard. And I think also from the club's point of view, the output that they can deliver is limited in reality, because they're not going to put transfer speculation up there, and actually the output from the club in terms of interviews has not been bad. We've had interviews from Max Sanders, really interesting one. We've had interviews with Mark Kennedy, but they're always going to be snippets. They're always going to be kind of media friendly snippets. The club, remember, in essence is a business. In essence, it's a business. So the stuff that it puts out has to be media friendly. Think about your workplace when they make a press release. Slightly different, but also slightly the same. The club aren't going to be putting out the rumours and that sort of thing. I get that coverage of the Lincoln United friendly and the Sleaford one as well may have been nice, but then bear this in mind: the club at the moment is operating on a rather skeleton media staff. There's holidays to get in. Media staff at the football club don't get holidays during season time. And it's hard during out of season because they're needed for transfer news, they're needed for all the different releases and stuff like that. So it's difficult, and this is probably one time where they're not that high on numbers, and they've got a lot of planning to do, which people forget. They think, well, they haven't put anything out, the media team must be sat twiddling their thumbs. Really? What about redesigning the program? What about planning the comms for things like iFollow? What about planning sponsors events and things like that, which still have to go ahead? There's one going ahead next week. Dinners, there's so much going on at the football club. They're not sat there twiddling their thumbs thinking, wow, we could put something out, but fuck it, why bother? Do you know what I mean? Not bothered to let people know. And there was a funny and this isn't me having a go at anybody, but there was a funny thread or exchange on social media a week or so ago about season tickets and how the club couldn't be bothered to communicate to fans that you needed to keep your season card. And that made me laugh because I could just picture the meeting, Liam Scully at the end and the media team and all of the board, and they're all sat there and they go, right, so people can use their card, can they? Yeah, they can use their card next year as long as they don't change seats. Oh, that's good. Shall we let them know? Nah, I can't be bothered. Do you know what I mean? Let's just move on to the next piece of business and let them guess. I mean, it's insanity. that people think that this sort of thing goes on at the football club. I have been lucky. I've been on the supporters board. Other people here will have been lucky to have been connected to the club in one way or another as well. And they'll know that absolutely nothing is left to chance. Every single bit of media output, every single event, everything is discussed. And there's so much discussed that you don't find out as well. Like the club media output is like the iceberg. You've got the point coming out the top of the sea like that, and then you've got this whole load of stuff underneath. So I think when we're talking about media output, when we're talking about coverage, to link what the club do with external media is a fallacy. I think it is. And I think actually, if you look back over the club's output this season, bar the friendlies that have been predominantly youth team, I think at Sleaford and Lincoln United, yeah, there could have been some coverage for that, admittedly. Even if it was a case of, the Red Imps Community Trust are there, can we tap up one of their media guys just for a quick match report or something? I get that. There was always things that the club would look at and say, well, maybe we could have done that, maybe we couldn't. But I think on the whole, it's hard to look at the lack of news at the moment and blame the club's media team. That's like turning on the BBC News, having no headlines and going, well, it's the BBC's fault. Well, it's not, it's the news, isn't it? It's the fact that nothing has actually happened. So I think the club, to put the club in with that is challenging. And I'm going to look like a right brown nose now because I'm going to switch straight over to Radio Lincolnshire. And I think there is an element of not really realising what we've got. And sometimes you don't realise what you've got till it's gone. And that's something that I think with Radio Lincolnshire is worth bearing in mind. There are clubs in areas across the country whose local radio don't cover them. So they might not get live comms, they might not get live commentary. There are clubs who are in an area where there are much bigger clubs, so you'll buy a certain newspaper and they'll be like third or fourth down underneath the much bigger clubs in the local paper rather, and on radio comms. We're actually very lucky. And again, what you have to realise is Radio Lincolnshire are not there to cover Lincoln City. That's fact. Well, Radio Lincolnshire are there to cover in Michael and Rob. They're there to cover local sports. They cover everything. Not just football, not just local football, but all sports. So they don't go in the morning, sit down around the desk and go, right, what can we do? Reference Lincoln City today. They go down and they're planning the whole sports output. And I think that's quite important to remember. And during the season, I've been there in the studio where Rob's been getting pelters online because they're talking too much about Lincoln City and not enough about Boston United, not enough about Gainsborough Trinity. And actually the sports output from Radio Lincolnshire, I don't think is bad. Very few radio stations, I think, will have reporters at friendly games. Very few. Might be wrong. Call me out if you think I am. But I was surprised to see a post-match interview with Mark Kennedy after the Gainsborough game and after, I think it was the Grimsby game as well. I was very surprised to see that because, it's... I've got something stuck in me there. I don't know what it is. I was surprised to see that. I was, because actually I thought, well, as supporters, we don't put a lot of weight behind friendly games, but we expect local media to do the same. And these are guys that are just meant to work 40-hour weeks like you and me. It's their paid job. I'll come to kind of other output shortly, but it's their paid job. They're there to kind of to do that and go home, and that's that. And so I think when you consider that, all the facets of their job, it isn't too bad. And you have to remember as well that they have to have the access to put the output out there. So for instance, Rob did a Mark Kennedy interview, which I've not had a chance to listen to yet, but we were lucky enough to get that access as well early on. But if other outlets don't have the access, they don't have that story to put out there. And then all they're doing is cribbing other people's news stories and putting them out there as their own. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of media is now, but I'll come to that again. And then people criticise the quality of the commentary. And it's funny because I was chatting to Gavin Gordon yesterday about kind of commentary and how it's perceived. And it's perceived as a really easy job. And it really isn't. It really isn't. Because especially if you're the lead commentator, if you're Rob or you're Michael, you're expected to, and yeah, these are base expectations. You're expected to know obviously who your own players are and be able to recognise them quickly. I sometimes get that wrong. Who scored that goal, Dad? After a goal, I've done it. How many times have you done it? Who got that? Well, if you're a radio commentator, you've got to know. And you might, for 1 second, have glanced down at your notes. You might have glanced across at who put the cross in so that you understand that. You might miss something. As soon as somebody on the radio misses something, everybody's all over them. Whereas in actual fact, it's really easy to do. You've got to know the opposition team inside out, but if you do it too much, then you get accused of pandering to the opposition. So what's the right level? Knowing all of the player names. So then you've got to recognise players that you won't see kind of season after, game after game. You'll only see them twice a season, but you've then got to recognise them from however far afield. It's a challenge. And Nick Oxbury, I've seen you've come on. I will come to you. It's not just yourself, and I take your points on board. So commentating on the game's not particularly easy, and it's hard if you're the co-commentator. I've done it myself once, loved it, absolutely loved doing it, but it's so hard and there's a real pressure, and if you do get one player name wrong, it throws you off, and it's not as easy as it sounds. And I think there are a good array of co-commentators now in and around Radio Lincolnshire. Jimmy Walker was very good. I enjoyed Gav Gordon when he did a game last season. Mark Hone is good. But you'll get people who then say that they don't like Mark Hone. It's personal preference, or they don't like Jimmy Walker, or they don't like Steve Thompson. It's personal preference. Some people won't like me. Some people will, and if I was to co-commentate, I wouldn't obviously do it for Radio Lincolnshire because I'm not a footballer, but if I was to do it, people would go, why is he on? I don't like him. I heard it post-match. Mark Wiley did some post-match stuff, Mark Wiley from the Echo, and I remember going online and people saying, who's he? Don't know what he's talking about. Of course he does. He watches Lincoln every single week. He writes about them, but his opinion and the way he came across didn't gel with certain people. And it did gel with other people. I'm not having a go here at Mark. I don't want to fall into that trap again. So I think that it's easier. It's easy to kind of look at commentary and say it's not good enough when actually it's not particularly easy. Now, Nick Oxbury, you did kind of start this. So he's put, let me just read this out. I've started debate. I still feel that with 11 days to go to the season, starting a few glaring gaps to starting 11, experienced local radio could not ask a few basic questions about ins and outs. The team at the moment, as it is going to struggle big time. One, that's your perception. Frankly, it is your perception, and I know, Nick, I'm going to be, you're keen on transfers. You love the news. You're somebody who kind of, consumes Lincoln news every day, and so when you go for a week or two without it, as with me, you're desperate for just something to come through. I get that. I understand that. Now, the interview that I think we see on the back of like Gainsborough and things like that is, a little bit about the game, a little snippet. We don't know what the interviewers are told to ask and not to ask. And that's not to say that the club control output. But I think we spoke to, when he spoke to Mark Kennedy the other day, Mark said, what happens with Chris Maguire from here is above his pay grade, which basically means the ins and the outs at the football club are not something the head coach is going to be concentrating on. He's going to be concentrating on training the players, putting the squad together tactically, that sort of thing. Now, you would expect him to have some knowledge of ins, almost certainly, but how much can he say? Genuinely, you don't know. Secondly, you don't know if the club have said to Michael or Rob, can you just not ask about this or that at the moment? Because we don't know where we are. We might be up in the air. Can you not ask about Harry Toffolo's sell-on clause, please? Because we don't want it out in the media that we're negotiating with a player at the moment, and we don't want them to think we've got more money than we have. So I think it's easy to look at what the Radio Lincolnshire put out and go and be critical. And I understand as fans, we would love to know, are there more signings due? And you would expect after tomorrow's game, home, big team, lots of focus, week to go, you would probably expect that question to be asked. And Adam Butler says Rob Makepeace asked Mark Kennedy, Milton Keynes, about incomings after Grimsby. Graham Borrell, I went to the media office yesterday and they were very, very, very busy. And it's true, it is. So I don't entirely take the criticism of Radio Lincolnshire. We would all do things differently. We all watch our favourite show and say we didn't like this bit or we didn't like that bit. We all have different opinions on the actual game. I think we all have different opinions on the coverage. But we are lucky to have the level of coverage that we have during the season from Rob and Michael. And I think somebody said the other day that Rob and Michael don't know much about Lincoln City, and that's absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. I mean, Rob was a fan long before he worked for Radio Lincolnshire. He's always been a passionate Lincoln City fan. I think Michael is an experienced broadcaster who is running an entire sports department, not just the Lincoln City department. I think it's really, really important to bear that in mind. And again, I think, you know, they put out what they can, but there's an element of officialdom to the BBC, remember, as well. So first of all, they are bound, because they're the BBC, a British Broadcasting Corporation. They are bound as a local media outlet to cover all local sports. So they have to do that. It's not a matter of neglecting Lincoln City. And secondly, the BBC are obviously judged very much on their output. So you wouldn't tend to get transfer rumours that have started on a website or on Twitter, particularly delivered via BBC. So that then brings us to a once thriving and dare we say, you know, at one time the most important form of media for football clubs, and that was the paper, the Lincolnshire Echo. And unfortunately here there is no defending what has happened to the Lincolnshire Echo. They were taken over by a Reach PLC, I believe it is. They closed, I think, the office in Lincoln. There's no reporters there anymore. This summer, as I understand it, they took Mark Wiley off football all summer and have simply stuck like some part-time writers or whatever they are on. And I just, it's dead. It's dead. I haven't bought an Echo in years. I think the last time I bought an Echo was probably around the time of the FA Cup run. But the coverage has been collapsing ever since John Pakey left. So the Echo wasn't bad after we fell into non-league, but I think it's, you know, its final days were kind of the 5 or 6 years ago now, and it pains me. But to be honest, it actually breaks my heart because I'm still passionate about print media. I still think, although print media will never be the same, you'll never get a paper out on a daily basis because the news on the back of the paper can be shared on Twitter. People will then not buy the paper, they'll share it all on Twitter, and there's no commercial revenue in the paper, not even in the advertising. So I understand how it has died, but it doesn't make the demise of local papers any less heartbreaking. You know, when I was growing up, the Echo was your main source of news. I remember Keith Alexander leaving the club the first time. I found out about it from a billboard outside my newsagents in Rugby. I remember, all of the kind of the big news stories when Keith was going to go. Remember that? And he was going to join. People thought he was going to join Peterborough, and there was this whole Keith at the bank, and it was conducted through the pages of the Echo. It was a phenomenal publication, and even results. You know, you would rush to get the Sports Echo, and everyone talks about it very fondly now. So, you know, you'd go up the high street and you'd stop in Rumbelows and watch the football scores coming up on the screen, and then you'd get the Sports Echo. You'd be reading a match report within an hour of leaving the ground. It was how they did it was actually phenomenal, and this wasn't like just a half-hearted match report, like a press association match report. This was an in-depth match report that ran to kind of a whole side of the Sports Echo. Fantastic. I used to get the Sports Echo the next day when I knew all the information in it because I wanted to keep it. I've got stacks of Sports Echoes at home, especially from kind of Keith Alexander's first couple of seasons and John Beck's era. It was the Sports Echo I was first published in. My first Lincoln City writing was in the Sports Echo, and it was just, I mean, like Chris Graham here. Chris says I miss the Sports Echo, and we all do. But would we buy it? That's the thing. I mean, I like the Football League paper, but is the money in producing a newspaper on a Sunday? I mean, you know, in an ideal world, probably you could produce it on the Monday and you could have coverage of a lot of the local sporting, but it's an awful lot of work for an outlet that a lot of younger people are saying that they don't need. The program's in threat. Print media don't need it, people say. But in 20 years' time, where will we be? I'm going to be booking sessions this season to get access to microfilms, to old Lincolnshire Echo, so that I can produce some articles on things that are featured in old newspapers and old Echoes. And a good friend, Malcolm Johnson, who produces content for the site, has got a pile of scrapbooks that we often refer to as well. And they are valuable. And we're not going to have that in 20 years' time. And the preservation of that history does worry me a little bit, if I'm honest. It's why I've always been passionate not only about print media, but also about kind of fan-driven media as well. And the loss of the Echo, and it hasn't gone, but the loss of the Echo's coverage is it's not a scandal, I suppose. It's progression, that it's really challenging, and the Echo's coverage has been awful. And the worst thing is, I don't know if anyone uses the news aggregated news now. for their stuff. But News Now, basically, every time a news story comes out about Lincoln City from one of their accredited sites, it goes on a list. So every day there's a list of constant news stories coming out about Lincoln City, and it's where a lot of kind of current media outlets like Football League World and 72 get their stories. They look on there, and when one comes up, they stick it out as their own. And that's a lot of modern media. That, you know, so many sites do that, and there's a lot of the stuff I do. I find on the News Now, link with a player, and then it's a race. Get it out there, link to the source, bingo, easy. And that's the problem, because a newspaper can't do that so quickly. The newspaper can't go, there's a rumour, Bosch, stick it out in my paper, sell it to you for 25p or 50p or £1 or whatever it was. Because by the time the newspaper's printed and out, everyone already knows it. They've been on Wikipedia, they know everything about the player, they've seen videos of him. It's the digital world. But I went on News Now and looked at the Echo output before I came out to do this chat with you. And it was woeful, because they're delivering news from 2-3 weeks ago in blocks. So they'll put like 5 news stories out all at the same time. But the headlines that they use make it feel like it's a new news story, and therefore people click on it and they'll go, oh, it's not a news story, and they move away from it. But the Echo have got their click. Doesn't matter if you read what it is, don't matter if you care what it is, they've got their click. Boom, let's move on to the next one. And that's how a lot of today's media works. It's how a lot of websites work. I think I've spoken about it before, that, you know, the same news story can be packaged 10 or 12 different ways. And yeah, I don't work on clicks, so I don't need to do it. I sometimes do it just so that my story kind of gets out there. I feel like if Danny Mandrew signs for the football club, right, and instantly News Now will have 10 stories on that. There'll be myself and Joe from All Lincoln, a really kind of good young blogger. We'll report and do a little bit of digging and try and bring you something different. The Echo will put it out, but that'll be 6 weeks later. And then the 72, Football League World, BBC, blah, 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 all put it out. Like a writer on Football League World, when I was there, and this isn't critical of them, by the way, but they were doing 15 articles a day. That was what we were doing, 12 to 15, depending on kind of the time of the season and everything. Now, so if you're doing 8 hours, that's an article every half an hour. And that's finding the news, and that's adding your pictures and your headlines and your links. Probably 10 minutes writing time tops. There's no way you can deliver something about Danny Mandrew to supporters that they don't already know in 10 minutes. It's surface content. 72 are the same, a lot of them are the same, and 1 or 2 of the writers might have a bit of expertise. They might put kind of a comment on there that you think, oh yeah, that's worthy. But in the main, it is down to somebody like myself or like Joe, who doesn't have any other news to do. You know, we don't cover anybody else. That's our sole bit of news. We might have already had a heads up, we might not. So we've already had an opportunity to look into Mandrew a little bit deeper. And so therefore you get slightly deeper content. But then if you get lost in a Lincoln signed 23-year-old Irish international signs for Lincoln, top player shuns Champions League football to sign for League One club, all of those headlines, you've got to try and stand out from that. Just not because I want the clicks, and not because any of us who want the clicks, because we want to bring the actual news to you. And that's why I appreciate when people kind of subscribe to the blog and indulge with the content that way. I'll turn around and go back now. The dog's on a good one this morning. That's kind of how media works. Unfortunately, that's what the Echo have taken to doing. You know, they're reporting news from 4 weeks ago, giving it a headline that makes it sound new, getting the click off you. And actually, I think long term it's more damaging for the brand of the Echo, if I'm honest, because I think eventually people will just, when Mark does come back and he does start getting into press conferences and he does start being able to report on games again, people aren't going to indulge, because they're just going to go, do you know what, you were crap over the summer, nothing to do with him. I think probably damage was done over lockdown as well, because a lot of the major news places just stopped paying staff and there was no news. Whereas over lockdown, that was where we wanted content. That's where you wanted content, wanted anything at all to take away the monotony. Fucking hell, there's a pheasant there, scared the life out of me. And so that's why, I was doing things like quizzes and stuff like that. That was as much for me as it was for anybody else, to keep me interested. And I think that brings us over then to fan-driven media, which, I was quite touched for people to be saying, Stacey West blog is the primary outlet for Lincoln City news and that sort of thing, and I appreciate that. And I'm sure Joe at All Lincoln, and like I say, another good blogger, Vital Lincoln City, certainly on the message board to a degree, is kind of very good as well for interaction. But I think it is easier for us, and I don't want to stand there and go and talk about how brilliant we are, because it's easier for fan-driven media. I have a job where if a news story breaks, I can half an hour write that news story up, do a little bit of investigating, package it together, send it off straight away, done and dusted. Then I'm back to my full-time job. And yes, we do it kind of out of hobby, out of a passion, but actually I think that makes it easier to produce good content, because we're interested in what we write. We're not having to write an article every 15 minutes. It's not surface content. We want to dig. I want to know more about Danny Mandrew when I write the article to send it over to you. And so that manifests itself as being, more in depth than some other outlets. And yes, it is than the Echo, because the Echo aren't even bothering at the minute. But I think there's always going to be a place for an official media. There's always going to be a place for club media. One media outlet, which I think is going to be local radio now, because I don't think local radio will ever die out in the same way that print media is doing. Certainly hope not. So local radio and then fan-driven media, and that's the way that we're going. And long term, I would like to find some sort of sustainable print media platform for kind of preserving what's happening now for future generations. When I did the fanzine, and lots of people helped out with that, I felt that we were producing in time, so not just people searching in 10 years time, I find a BBC article fascinating. I think I might lose my signal here again. So yeah, they might find a film of the Echo and look, people, but there's so much content around it to understand it. And it's the same with Lincoln City, isn't it? It's the same about the Keith Alexander era. You can have a look back at the results and playoffs 2003, Simon Yeo, brilliant, but would that tell the whole story? No. So then you start going through the Sports Echo, reading the letters pages, reading the fanzines of the time, the Deranged Ferret, and it gives you more of an idea of what was happening. It'll break my heart to lose that. And that's what we're in danger of losing, especially with the Echo going, because radio, this video, people won't watch this back in 20 years' time, will they? I think I'm having signal issues. So my apologies if that's the case. Anyway, that's where we are. Let me have a look back at some of these comments quickly. And then we'll crack on. So morning Kate, morning Jacob. Jacob, are you at the match tomorrow? I'm afraid not, mate. I'm not. No, I've got going to watch a band called Ferocious Dog in Leeds. Really excited about. So Kate says maybe we don't need an away kit every year, and that's why they haven't released it yet. No, there isn't a away kit. I was involved in the design process. If it's the one that I recall, it's a belter. It's worth the wait if it's the one that I recall. So Kate also says the club has never given coverage to Lincoln City 11 games. So because Charlie Kendall played against Lincoln United, it doesn't mean it was first team. And the club hasn't. Traditionally, a Lincoln City 11 is almost like saying it's Lincoln Reserves going over and playing. Not, they wouldn't label it like that, but it's players like Makama who are going to be on the fringes of the squad, who go over, some of the youth team players. The club haven't covered it. It would be nice to. Premier League club would, but Premier League club have got a lot of money. So So Stu Wells, I do think the choice to make everything out of sporty fabric is an opportunity lost. I used to like the cotton polo tops they used to do, and they fit a regular better. Yeah, so we're back on the away kit there, and some of the products in the club shop. It's got a really good range. It feels more like a clothing shop when you go in than a club shop, doesn't it? There's not as many other kind of bits and bobs in there, but they don't do a bad job. I just wish they'd put some of my old books in there. I've got a stack of them. Richard Godson, how you doing, my friend? Good morning, Gary. Have you heard anything about the training regime this pre-season? I gather it's the toughest the players have experienced. Snippets. I think that's not just Mark, that's Ross as well. I think Ross has come in. We need to be fitter, and fit teams, do have advantages. Think about Danny Cowley. Danny Cowley's teams were very, very fit. I think that's something that probably dropped off a little bit last season. And I think also it's one of the reasons perhaps why one or two players haven't been seen as much in pre-season as we'd like. Andrew Robinson, I assume that's your, I don't know if you get called by anything else, my friend, because you've got 3 Christian names there, but good morning to you. Nick, we've already spoken to. Adam Butler, we're on to Radio Lincolnshire now. Some of the personal comments directed at Radio Link's presenters on Twitter last season were really distasteful, I think so. Love or loathe these people, they play professional football, the co-commentators, and they do know what they're talking about. I don't agree with everything Mark Hone says on the radio, but I respect everything he says on the radio because he's been there and he's done it. He's more knowledgeable than me. I think he articulates himself well. I think Jimmy Walker is the same. I think when you're listening at home, it's easier to maybe spot repetition and you think of that as being deliberate, whereas in actual fact, when you're on the spot and you have a good idea and you've said it once and 5 minutes have passed, you say it again. And so I think there was a game against Fleetwood a couple of years ago where Mark had kind of criticised Teo Eden probably twice in 10 minutes, saying he didn't look like a natural left back. And he didn't in that game, Teo. He didn't have a great game. But when you hear it twice, you think, bloody hell, he's been a bit harsh to Teo. But when you're saying it, when you're sat there, that's not how it is. And it's perception. And as for Michael and Rob, I've said my piece on those two. I think that Michael and Rob are hugely important to the football club. I think that they do a good job of balancing football club news with the BBC's requirements as well. Everything could be better. BBC Radio Lincolnshire coverage could be better. My site could be better. Already coming up here, my signal's gone, and it'd be easy to criticise that. Remember the BBC. Okay, we pay our license fee. We pay our license fee for a hell of a lot more than just Lincoln City coverage. Mark Cohen is perfectly fine commentator, very repetitive when talking about Boston, but we've had far worse. And that repetition, as I've said, is very, very easy. Ty, morning Ty, very impressed with the audio visual radio guys. Excellent stuff. Kate says, Rob Makepeace knows more about Lincoln City than most of his critics put together. And I would say I'd agree with that. Leslie, hope you're well, Leslie. The club's a business. No business shows their cards to the rest of the market. So that's why you don't see things like behind the scenes training. There's some elements of player recruitment that when Jez has done his presentations, he hasn't touched upon. And he said them, I've spoken in private to them, and he says, we don't put that out there. Because as soon as we put out there that we were doing Zoom presentations and stuff like that, he said, we were getting 8 other agents coming back saying, oh, this club are doing that now. That club are doing that now. So they hadn't thought about it on their own. And it had gone out into media. Yeah, agents and other, like Man City might talk to a club and say, oh, Lincoln put a great presentation to us. And the other club go, well, we can do that. So it's always going to get out there, but you don't make it easy, do you? Don't make it easy for your competition. If you're a business, Leslie runs a best fish and chip shop in Lincoln. But she's not then going to put together a newsletter saying, well, we use this oil and these chips and this is how we cook them. That's how we do it because we're great. Because everyone else will go, oh, well, we'll do that then. And then you lose business. So I think that's in kind of defense of the club's media output. To a degree, it does have to be a little bit restricted. Elliot Taylor, morning, Elliot. Radio Lincolnshire is much better than my local radio in Leicester. Some years ago, they did ask some tricky questions and end up being banned from doing interviews. I think that's a great point. The guy from Grimsby was banned, wasn't he? Matt, is it Matt? I think he was banned from Grimsby by John Fenty. He was hung out to dry at a fans forum. It was embarrassing. Shrewsbury banned, I think, a local radio or a local paper. There the Shropshire Star, I think it is, that still do quite good coverage actually, but they were banned as well from Shrewsbury. And the club, well, I don't think would ever ban local media, but I do think that there is occasionally a restriction on what can and can't be asked. Look, I'll level with you now. We did the interview with Mark Kennedy the other week, and we weren't asked to do this, but in order to make the interview flow better, I said to the club, I'm going to send the questions over in advance so that Mark can have an idea of what he's going to ask and have an answer in his head. So, if you're asking about an anecdote and if I said to you now, tell me an anecdote about your time at this place, you go, whereas if you know the questions coming and you've had 10 minutes to think about it, or an hour or 2 hours, that's fine. So the questions went over an hour or two beforehand. And when we got there was one question, and it was about onwards recruitment after Tashan Oakley-Booth said, I'd like to ask about this. And Mark and Jez basically said, look, we're close, but we can't give you a definitive answer on that. So, we'd rather that it wasn't in the live broadcast. Fair enough, brilliant. And then when I did drop the question in the live broadcast about the George Grant sell-on fee, I got one word answer. Because what else can you answer? Jez was never going to go, yes, there's a sell-on fee for George Grant and it's 15 grand and it's going in the bank because you're showing your card. So he said, no. He said, sorry, yes, there is. And that was that. It's not great radio, is it? It's not great podcasting. So that's just to be aware of. I don't think that the club will ever say you can and can't ask about this. For instance, Chris Maguire, would be easy to say, don't ask about Chris Maguire, but they did actually, Rob did push on it a little bit. And I think during the season, Rob's pushed quite a bit. There was criticism at the end of the Portsmouth game, Charlton game, where there was talk about this reduced budget, which was a misinterpretation at the time. And Rob asked about it, and everyone was then criticising him, saying you can't ask questions like that, it's detrimental. And which is it? You ask them or you don't. So Rob Haddon says, spot on about commentators. Mark Owen is one of the best in my opinion, with Mark Roberts lead commentator. Without BBC Radio Lincolnshire, Lincoln City would have no coverage. Fact. Yeah. Adam Barlow says, we badly need a Maurice Burton type reporter. Chap was a legend. Yeah, I remember the first time I read some Maurice Burton stuff, and obviously it was after I'd become a fan. And the insight that he gave me into that particular season was phenomenal. He even had a piece in the programme, and he was openly critical of the team in the programme. I mean, the guy was he was what the old style hack used to be. Dedicated to writing about Lincoln City, understanding everything about the club, understanding every aspect, not afraid to pull punches, not living up the club's arse, bringing the news, but also kind of being a critical friend, I think, as well. Not being a constant nuisance with no access. You've got to balance it. It's really tough. And I think him and people like Lee Curtis as well, who I've got loads of respect for, they were the type of reporters that I wanted to be. And it's kind of how I try and work my site, is trying to be critical where it needs to be, not overly critical, try and see both sides of the coin. That's what Maurice Burton was. And he had to write match reports that were so in depth. I go through old newspapers and his match reports, you feel almost like you're there. Fantastic. Let's have a look. So Richard Godson, I'm old enough to remember when it was the Football Echo. It graduated to it from Eagle Comic. I've got some old Football Echoes. Chris Ray says, nothing better than leafing through an old programme. Got him to think that potentially the next 50 years, the generation of nerdy Lincoln fans might not have that pleasure. Chris and I have spoken before. I think if the programme ever dropped out, there would be a band of supporters, it probably including myself and Chris, who would come together and put something out on a monthly basis, just with match reports and club news, and not quite a fanzine, but not quite a programme. But I think that it's having the market for it, it's having the time for it. It's a labour of love, and Reach PLC don't have time for a labour of love with the Echo, and the club don't have the resources to have a labour of love with the programme. So if you want the programme, this year's programme there's been a lot of thought gone into it, a hell of a lot. I've had meetings with the club, put suggestions that you guys have given me to it, and if we don't buy it this year, it's going to go, and that's as simple as that. And it is going to be hopefully a better programme, with content that's kind of a little less timed, content that you can't find online as well, that sort of stuff, collectible hopefully to a degree. So buy it, because otherwise you're going to lose it. The club lost a fixed amount on the programme last year that was not just several £100, but as I understand it, several £1,000s. They don't want to do away with the programme, but they can't have areas of the club losing money. It's a business. It's that simple. Also, I think that in the programme this year, from what I understand, I think there are going to be fewer adverts as well. So Walter says Radio Lincolnshire could be a little more imaginative, like Mark Hone, and would love to see another Lincoln pundit bouncing off each other. Would perhaps give us extra insight from a former pro. Yeah, it's fair enough. I think it's tough to have three people in a booth sometimes. So and Adam Butler says Honey will be far more involved with Lincoln on the radio this season, which is good. I think then my signal was going. Andrew, James, Thomas Robinson. I might pick one each time actually. So James Robinson. We probably get more news about City on your dog walks. Yeah, it's not really news, is it? It's just me rambling. Walter, could we have a League One version of LUFC TV? Probably too expensive, but maybe worth a look. Well, look, I think when you look back at Match Day Live that I did with that Sam Ashu did, and I was kind of a pundit on, that was absolutely brilliant. I loved being a part of that, but it was a cost for the club to put together. It was a cost of Sam, for instance, for a start. It was a cost to the people at the club who were kind of producing it. Charlie was always in the background. It was sponsored in the end, I think, by a few people to try and keep it going. But it was a great program. I'd love to be involved in something like that again. They were genuinely some of the best broadcasts that I've done. No disrespect to the podcast or to these, but that was the type of show I think could be popular. It would have to go out really on a Friday rather than a Saturday. You then wouldn't have the team news. It can't go out on a Saturday because nobody will watch it because they'll be at the game. You could do a post-match one, I suppose, where you kind of get people in and talk post-match. But if the club aren't on a good run, it's a club-sponsored program, remember. So they're not going to want you then, or they're not going to want me sitting there then saying this is crap and that's crap. As it was, we did well that season, so it was easy to be quite positive. But, it was hard doing a club-sponsored show when you'd lost 3 or 4 on the bounce and we'd had some really poor results. So again, it's there is scope for that, but then if it's somebody like myself and Ben or somebody else doing it, you then have licensing problem around highlights and bits and bobs. So it's tough. I really enjoyed doing that, and I think the scope for that, but again, it's only the same as this sort of media. It's gone. It's gone in a couple of years' time, isn't it? So lots of people saying I was buffering. My apologies for that. Kev Green, nice change. Enjoy your gig tomorrow. Thank you, mate. Kate says still have programs for pretty much every home and away from 2002, 2011. It's always strange going back looking at them, seeing younger versions of players who came to us. It's a weird little time machine. Absolutely 100%. Steve Freeston, only way you could do an LUTV thing for Lincoln is full sponsorship and adverts. Yep, you could, and then it becomes a whole department within itself. And then is it profitable for the club to do that? They have to take somebody else on. Then there's criticism from people saying, well, there's too many people at the club who aren't involved in football who get paid. It's hard. Dale Warner, I remember Rob Makepeace taking stick for asking Danny Cowley if he was leaving at Wickham away or a game before he went. I love difficult questions. It's proper reporting that doesn't hide the truth. Rob isn't afraid to ask them, I think, when he can post-match. I mean, that was brutal, the Doncaster game. It was brutal. And Danny was swearing he wasn't going to go. And that's kind of part of Lincoln legend now, isn't it? Because a week later, he's gone. And so actually, Rob was asking the right questions. I don't think it's become I don't think Radio Lincolnshire deserves some of the stick that it's getting. Leslie says that show got me through lockdown, loved it, which I'm assuming is the Match Day Live show. Do you know what? It did me as well because it gave me a purpose. Having to be kind of in the bar at 12 o'clock, ready, set up to go, going through it half an hour beforehand with Sam, and as things got going on, I was then involved in kind of taking off some of the comments that would come on. Advertising, streaming sites and stuff like that. It was great. It was a brilliant show. Viewership was all right. It was good. There was a 1,000 or 2,000, I think, and it would sometimes go up after the event. We had some good guests on. There was a lot of work went into it, and commercially, it didn't earn a lot of money. What you would need is a company to say, we will sponsor the Match Day Live. It's going to be $5,000 for the year, and then say to somebody, there's your budget for producing Match Day Live this year. Go and make it work. But then it has to be club sponsored, and that's the problem. And it was really a vehicle, I think, to sell iFollow passes, which were a form of income. And that's why it was good for the club, because it helped kind of push some of their commercial, but it also helped people feel connected during lockdown. It was a great initiative. Whoever thought of it deserves an award, I think, at the club. Don't know who was behind that. Don't know if it was Terry and Media or Liam or Clive or something like that, but it was great. So right, so Tony says, on the thoughts of Matchday Live, surely with the club's links with the uni, they could look at working with the uni for work experience in their media students. Wouldn't be an answer to making it free, but could cut some costs. The uni actually did a show. It was when Aaron was there, Aaron Mayhew, who was a really good guy. And he did a Thursday afternoon show with a panel, and they got to show the highlights, and they would chat to somebody else from the university. I went on it once. It was usually somebody like Mark Wiley or somebody from the club would go along, and it was really good. There's certainly scope for that, and I think the club worked quite closely with the uni. I mean, I know Kieran was involved with Aaron Mayhew. He was one of kind of that kind of cohort, and he works for the club now, so I think that there's a definite progression there. So Carl Beach liked Matchday Live as well. I'm quite pleased actually. It was only mentioned as on the off chance. Matchday Live was always superb. Was superb always. Look forward to watching. Ran so smoothly and was interesting. Didn't always run smoothly. Carl, you only have to ask Sam about that. It was Sam's consummate professionalism that made it look like it ran smoothly, but oh my lord, sometimes it just did not. Because when we were doing it away, you needed to go back over to the ground and get pictures from the ground, or the player interviews, or the teams. The internet at away grounds is awful, and sometimes like it'd be Sam and me would be doing all of the producing as well, so we'd be queuing up the videos and stuff while we were talking. I mean, it was great fun. It was an eye-opener for me. But yeah, it was brilliant. It was brilliant while it was out there. Hopefully it'll be one of those things that in the future people do remember and kind of remember it fondly. It was a pleasure to be in on it. And brilliantly, Kate says, I liked Matchday Live because of your 1920s moustache. Yeah, I did do my November, didn't I? That got quite a bit of stick. I remember that. So, and Jacob, I remember Jacob always watching Matchday Live, didn't want to miss it. And Leslie says they're not running smoothly, added to it. Yeah, it was it was just brilliant. It was brilliant. And maybe that's a long future of media. I suppose at least the YouTube video stays up there for as long as YouTube are in going. So there we go. Right, well look, this has run a lot longer than I imagined. I've come what's called the long way round, which is a kind of a 2.5 mile loop, as opposed to the normal kind of 30-second walk that the dog likes. He's miles behind me. I don't know if you can see him. He's absolutely miles back there, bless him. But bollocks, he can have a walk. He hasn't had one for ages. Thank you very much for listening. Just try and think, with not lumping all of the different media in together, try and remember how how these things work and how different types of media are able to react quicker and what they put out. It's not the coverage, it's not the outlets that you're particularly frustrated at, bar the Echo. It's the lack of news, it's a lack of action. We're getting close to the season. We expected signings, we expected an away kit, they haven't come. It's frustration. It's not even a lack of patience. Now I feel it every day. I'm looking, thinking, am I going to get an email? Are we going to get that big superstar signing that we kind of hoped? We're going to get the Premier League winger. I hope for Morgan Whittaker it's not him. Is it going to be, I heard Oscar Bob mentioned once, well, we're going to get somebody like him, and now we're thinking, well, maybe we're not going to get anybody. It's not long. Brennan Johnson arrived after the season kicked off. Let's not forget that. Josh Griffiths and Alex Palmer both arrived at the end of pre-season, and their first games, I seem to recall, were league games. So I expect stuff to happen this week. If it doesn't, I'll be just as frustrated as you, but I won't be blaming Rob and Michael or Luke and the media team. I won't be blaming anyone. I'll just be pissed off. So thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. As I say, there might not be a lot of content over the course of the weekend, just because I'm away in Leeds, but we shall ramp it up next week with the 1 to 24, which is going to take a fair bit of work, and put some predictions together. I hope you all have a good Friday and a great weekend. Cheers. Bye.